Hello. Today is Thursday, October 14th, 2004. I am Doris Karp, and I am interviewing Jean Atlas for the Milwaukee Jewish community. This is the 350th anniversary of the Jews in America. What is your full name, Jean?
My full name is Jeanette, which is my official name. However, since 1938 or 40, I've been known professionally and personally as Jean Atlas. So I would consider Jean Atlas.
That is your married name. What was your maiden name?
My maiden name was Shapiro.
Where and when were you born?
I was born in Milwaukee on 7th and Germania, upstairs my parents' grocery store, and I was born on January 4th, 1921.
Who were your first family members to settle in Milwaukee?
The first family members to settle in Milwaukee were my mother and father, who were, I'm sorry, of my immediate family or of the Shapiro family?
Of your parents. Your parents were?
Well, that's it.
Yes.
My parents were Rose, her Jewish name was Rochze Shapiro, and my father was Louis B. Shapiro. However, he got that name Shapiro, and this is out of context, of course, right here, because at the immigration site, they asked who sponsored him, why did they come here, and it was my mother's brother, the Shapiro brothers. But when they pronounced their name and tried to spell the word in Suk, which is my father's actual name, they, by mistake, through some error, gave him the name of Shapiro. So therefore, everybody that came along with him, his brother and his parents, all also became Shapiro. So I'm a double Shapiro on both sides. I'm proud of it.
What was your father's name?
Louis B., but it would have been in Suk, I-N-S-U-K.
Oh,
okay.
Thank you. I didn't understand
Yes.
that. What brought them to America?
Okay. What brought them to America was the fact, number one, that some of my father's family was there, very few, but mainly my mother's family, the Shapiro family. And she had I think three of the brothers were there already. In fact, the youngest, came with my parents and grandparents, the Shapiro brothers. The oldest was Nathan Shapiro, and there was his next brother was Marcus, who was called Moche, and the other brother was Laser, also Louis, but Laser Shapiro. And they had arrived before that with their parents, which were my maternal grandparents. And also they wanted a better life, and they wanted to be with the rest of the family.
Were your parents married in Europe?
My parents were married in Europe, yes. Mm-hmm.
And how did they make their living in Milwaukee?
Not in Europe, but you don't want to know that
Oh,
first.
how did they make their living in?
Okay.
Yes.
My father was a Melamed, a Hebrew teacher. He was a Hebrew scholar. My mother was a dressmaker. I was also told, and I have to incorporate my grandparents, that my mother's, this was hearsay from an aunt, Ruth Gordon, a cousin, Ruth Gordon, my oldest living Shapiro relative, of which there are very few. Ruth Gordon, who was a Shapiro, claims that my father's or mother's, she wasn't sure, father's or mother's parents ran an inn. So I was told. Then I heard that one of the sets of grandparents, and I think it was my mother's, the maternal grandparents, that they were horse stealers. Not horse stealers, as my brother would have said, but horse stealers. So therefore, that was part of where the money was coming from.
Where did they live in Europe?
They lived in what was called Molchin. And I think in Polish they called it, I heard these words, Majorczka. And I often heard the term Vilna Gubernia in Russia. Vilna Gubernia, whether that means they were close to that bigger shtetl. Yeah.
What year did they come to America?
This is also going to be a little speculation. Learning from my cousin Ruth Gordon that her family came in about 1908 or 1910. She believes that my parents came and and the rest of the family that we haven't talked about who else accompanied them, maybe 5 years later. So it could have been approximately 1915.
What kind of a neighborhood did you grow up in, Jean?
Okay. We're skipping because we didn't finish who came along. Doris, would you like to?
Yes, who came
along
along with them?
think
Yes.
I kind of did that in a chronological order. Who arrived with my parents were his parents, and their names were Vera Shapiro, and my grandmother's name was Shana Blume, meaning beautiful flower. And my father's brother, Max, who would have been an Insuk originally, who also became a Shapiro, and my mother's youngest brother, Mike, who was a true Shapiro. So they had his brother, my father's grandparents, and my mother's brother. And two of my siblings, my two oldest brothers, Aaron Shapiro and Jack Shapiro.
Did you have more siblings?
Afterwards, yes.
In America?
My mother, I was told, had 7 children in total. 3 of them passed away in Europe. And later on, there were myself and my younger brother. Yeah. So
What is your younger brother's name?
My youngest brother's name was Meyer, known as Mike Shapiro.
Mm-hmm.
And since there's an Uncle Mike, we'll stick to the Meyer Shapiro. I was the youngest. And we were born in Milwaukee. And would you like to know where they arrived at which port?
Yes.
And I was told, and there were 2 different versions, that from my oldest brother, that they arrived at the port of Boston. Although some of the family says it came to Ellis Island. And I think we even have the name of the boat that they came in. Oh, according to my oldest brother, they first took a small boat to Liverpool, and then they got on a big ship called Laconia. And they arrived in the port of Boston. And although some others say Ellis Island.
Did you live in a Jewish neighborhood?
Very definitely, yes. The first place before my birth, I was told that my parents lived, and these streets are questionable because we hear different versions, that they lived on either 9th or 8th and what they might have called Sherman or Vine. And my uncles helped my father because first they wanted them to go with them into the business that they were in, the junk business. But my father, being a Melamed, thought that wasn't the kind of business he wanted to be associated with. So my uncles bought them a grocery store, a small grocery store, and evidently they lived in the basement, and the grocery store was above them on 8th or 9th and Vine or Sherman. But later on, and that's where I was born, evidently business was better and they were able to move to 7th, and this is a very strange name. It's 1 block north of Walnut Street, was called 7th and Germania, in a big corner grocery with a big flat upstairs.
Did your family belong to a synagogue?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Would you like to hear more about our grocery store in the neighborhood, or before we go on to that?
All
Okay.
right.
The corner store was very popular, and what I found out in being involved with the grocers of Milwaukee, with the Chudno Project and the other museum, is that practically on every corner, and sometimes more than one on a block, was a Jewish grocer. And of course, when you'll hear the name Walnut Street, and we were 1 block from Walnut Street, that's where all the Jewish people lived. So we were definitely in a Jewish neighborhood with Jewish grocers, Jewish bakers. I think there was the Krasno Bakery, was one of the bakers. I have them written down, but I'm going to see what I can remember. There was a couple delicatessens, one of them being Plotkin and Cone. There was Albaum's bookstore. Oh, there were other grocers and very familiar names, and I have them someplace down here. But I think that what I can tell you is that our store was, like many of the stores, a gathering place. And all I remember is that everybody worked very hard, got up very early in the morning, went to the commission row, and first my brothers would go with a coaster. My grandfather, mind you, and what they call his Landsmann, Michael Katz, a well-known person, the Katz family, they would go with a horse and wagon and sit on top of the wagon with what they call their capotes, their Russian hats, and with their long beards, and they were stared at by everyone, and they would go down to Commission Row. And I do recall that my mother worked very hard, ran up and down the stairs to make meals. My grandparents helped with the kids. Grandfather went to market, the boys delivered, and it was a family business. It was a meeting place, and I can tell you that in our store, like in many of the others, if the people couldn't pay, there was always this gentleman's agreement with a little note. They called it a zettel, that took your word that you would pay for it. And in my family especially, what I do know, the tradition was, whether they could pay for it or not, my parents would extend the service of giving them the food, and I know that they went as far as sending my brothers, even if they didn't pay and if they knew the family was needy, they would deliver food there. If they came to our store, my mother would feed people, give them care packages. This has been the tradition, the background I lived in all my life. Later on in our home, somebody came to collect money. They came in, they got a lunch, they got a check, and they got a care package.
Did your family belong to a synagogue?
Yes. The first synagogue that I recall is called Anshe Sephard. That was the Russian synagogue, and it was on 12th, and I believe it was near Titonia, and 12th and perhaps Lloyd.
Garfield. And Garfield?
I meant to say Garfield.
Yes.
I'm sorry. It was Garfield. And I do recall the women sat upstairs. I sat with my grandparents, and the men were downstairs. And I do recall the balcony coming downstairs where the younger ones could go out. There was a candy store on the corner on Titonia. We could sneak out once in a while. And parading from one synagogue to another, all the way up and down 11th Street, where my grandfather belonged to the Rameda Shishil and was president of one of the organizations.
Was going to the synagogue important to your family?
Yes, it was. Yes.
Your father was a Malamed.
He was a Hebrew
Yes.
teacher, a Hebrew scholar. But however, he was a grocer. My mother was a business lady too. To begin with, he was a grocer, yeah.
So what was your educational background?
Would you like to know what my father went into later on, or would you
Right,
after
yes.
that? Or
Could you pause for 1 second?
yes.
Now.
All right. My father, after many years, probably 5 years after I was born, we moved to 11th and Meineke, where my father bought a big property, a corner duplex. In fact, he turned the bottom flats into 2 flats, purchased a apartment house next door, and owned other properties on Capitol Drive. In fact, I wish that was a situation now, and I was always complaining because we had to go every Sunday and collect rent. How wonderful, and close to the Depression time. And my uncles were also in the real estate business. But at some time or other, there was a Depression, very shortly around that time. But my father seemed to do pretty well, somehow got out of it, and he had an opportunity to help my mother's brothers. So he repaid them by always helping. My mother, I remember, was helping everybody financially. We owned the first car, I think it was called a Hupmobile, and I was very lucky. I was the only girl among all my friends, and the boys also, that had a car. Drove our car to school, to Marquette.
So what was your Jewish background, your educational
Okay.
background?
Had private tutors, and that was Mr. Gutnick and Mr. Stillerman in the house, private Hebrew tutors.
Was your family a traditional Jewish family?
Yes. First of all, I don't know if I mentioned that I spoke Yiddish before I spoke English because my grandparents lived with us. And my other grandparents, the maternal, lived a few blocks away. So I used to love to play in piano and sing Yiddish songs to them. So the Yiddish Mama Lushan was very important to us.
What school did you attend?
I attended my first school when we lived on 11th and Meineke was Lee Street School from first grade to the 6th grade. 7th and 8th grade I went to, I would think it was called 12th Street School across from North Division. That was 7th and 8th, and then I went to North Division and graduated in 38.
And what was the rest of your education? Where did you go to the university?
Then, right after graduation, I went to Marquette University from 1938 to 1942. Majored in education and I minored in sociology. And would you like the rest of my education?
Yes, please.
Oh, I don't think I'm even going to have to look. I'm
Yes.
hoping I'll remember. I did graduate work in social work at Loyola University. I did graduate work at UWM. I did graduate work from University of Wisconsin, always in social work and healthcare, and I got my nursing home administrator's license through the University of Wisconsin. But I was continually, as my husband, I can't separate myself from my husband. We did everything together, and we were always learning and always going to school and always getting more credit. So I continued doing graduate work, continuing with seminars, healthcare seminars, medical social work, geriatrics. That was my main interest in life, more so than teaching.
When were you married?
Married when I graduated, graduated in June, and we got married September 1st, 1942. And that was during the time of the war. My husband enlisted, and I traveled with him from 1942 to 1945. San Antonio, Texas, and Fresno, California. Where in California, I taught high school, and in Texas, I became a social worker, had a job, or vice versa. But I was constantly working.
To whom were you married?
To Alex Atlas
And
for 61 years.
Wonderful. And you had children?
But we lost a daughter very shortly after birth, very young, very shortly after a very difficult pregnancy. Became pregnant again and early died the second time. Tried a third and it didn't work, and we adopted our son, Lawrence for Larry. And unfortunately, very tragically, after celebrating with us our anniversaries and many simchas, shortly after that developed cancer and died at the age of 53. A very bright, wonderful young man.
And what did you do in Milwaukee? What agencies were you involved within?
Well,
the
my
city?
first jobs were, I started at Department of Public Welfare right after graduation before I left to travel with Al. When I came back, I went into teaching. My husband was teaching also, but he was also going and getting many more degrees and working toward his doctorate. I kept on going to school, however, but I did work for the Milwaukee public school system as a substitute in the high schools, long-term substitute, homebound teacher, and I worked there until in between, I also somehow or other accidentally got into interior decorating. And while our son was growing up, worked first from home, and then a brother of mine opened up a store in our name, an appliance store, so somehow or other, I was forced to protect our credit rating and so on. So opened up a little interior decorating and was mentored by Fritzie Pollock. And suddenly I was taking people to the merchandise mart. I was suddenly decorating houses and really enjoying the very interesting career. And then in 1962, I got a call from Max Taglin at the Jewish Home on 50th Street, the original home, saying they needed a social worker, a director of social service. Would I be interested? And I was, and it was a very, very wonderful, started my career in geriatrics and working with the Jewish people. And I think that that's what I was born to do, because that was a labor of love. So I was very involved there, director of social service. I was director of, I did the admissions, I did work with volunteers, I did programming, I did in-services, I planned events, I started reality orientation, remotivation, I started the groups, I kept hiring one social worker, two social workers, 3 and 4, all Jewish social workers, and we started having model seders for those who couldn't come to a regular seder. I made sure we had the Shabbat services with wine and lich benching. I had started a men's choir. I had a cousins group, cousins club there, a little cousins club. There were people related. I had the men's club, couples club, and I was constantly, and my husband, alongside of me, even though he was teaching, was always involved in all of my endeavors, no matter what I did at any point of life. I can never say I, it was always we.
Was this at the Jewish home?
This was the original Jewish home.
On 50th?
Yes, then when we planned to move, when they started building, I was on the long-range planning and was very involved with the moving, planning meetings with families, and educating the residents, preparing them, working with people, wonderful people in my department, Sarah Hiller-Safer, working with Eunice Kane. I had Gert Kozak. I hired all these wonderful social workers, worked with Nina Stillerman in the workshop. We worked together and then got the volunteers to prepare the residents, and I was very involved always with who went where. And I remember when we moved to the home, finally, Nita Corey, who started in my department as a volunteer and as a student, and we worked together, and we were very, very fond of each other because we learned so much from each other. I admired her so. I don't have to tell you what a very special person she is, and that was a pleasure working with her. So we slept, both Nita and I slept at the new home the first night. And I recall my son and daughter-in-law moving around beds and mattresses, and my son, may he rest in peace, put up a little board for me, a magnetic board, where I could decide who goes where. And it was quite a busy time, and we had a long waiting list, and it was a time of transition. But the wonderful volunteers assisted with the transfer and the buses, and I have many pictures. And I was kind of the historian also for the Jewish home. I still have 3 files at the Jewish home of many pictures of going all the way back. Yeah.
Are you going to give your files and your pictures to the Milwaukee Jewish Historical Society?
I'd like to give some of them. Some of them, they're constantly using some of them for their history, but I'm sure copies can be made, and I've given them for public relation. Yeah, they're in the files at the Jewish home. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
But at the Jewish home, I worked there until our first grandchild was born, our granddaughter, till 1977. And I wore many hats.
And after you retired, then you were a very busy woman.
I never retired. It's just that I wasn't getting paid. Mm-hmm. But in the interim, though, I also, and I don't know how I even started. My mother happened to have been the first resident or patient at the Jewish Convalescent Hospital, and I used to work many long hours, sometimes 60 hours at the home. and I used to go every night to the convalescence center. They thought I was their night social worker. And of course, I spent a lot of time there. But later on, when Ben Lane, whom I had worked with as an administrator at the Jewish home on Prospect, also became an administrator after he left the Jewish home and had come back from partial retirement, whatever. I always made it a point when they had Stuart Bonner as administrator. Somehow I was always there helping. I helped Stuart Bonner with getting his license, and I wanted to help Ben Lane. And somehow, suddenly I got very involved in volunteer work. I worked with Evelyn Panage, who was a paid social worker. So I helped out in social service when they had special problems. I worked with the what they call the Women's Auxiliary with the volunteers. I planned special events there. I worked with some wonderful people. Like
Was this on
at the
Convalescent
Convalescent Center
Home
on 51st and Silver
Center,
Springs.
yes.
Yeah. And I worked with in putting up the 45th anniversary. I put together their 45th anniversary, worked on the history, did an ad book with wonderful people like Claire Shaffron of blessed memory. I worked with on this book and the ads and the history with Barbara Stein. I worked with people like Leo Herman, and then, of course, my friend, whom I admire and respect so much, Abram Chudnow, got me into fundraising there when they were starting their expansion. So I did many things there. In fact, I did the PR for Bernie and Helen Sorf. And if you've been to Peck Hall, we transferred the Wall of Honor, the Sorf Wall of Honor, and that was the work that I was very involved in. Put that together, raised funds like $40,000 in his honor, did all their public relations, and had all kinds of special events. I'm an organizer, and when somebody retired, I planned their events.
You had a very full
Yes, very full. And
professional life.
Yes, and in between, I must tell you, I worked at We Care, the nursing service, and I did their geriatric conferences. I also worked part-time at Colonial Manor as the director of social service part-time when they needed me to fill in and the person was on vacation or they needed help, and did their admissions. And I volunteered at Mount Sinai, their geriatric outpatient department. I don't know, I did so many things in my life that I'm sure it was very interesting, very busy, very involved, and always involved with Jewish organizations, on their boards, on special fundraising, the board of working with ORT, special fundraising, and currently am volunteering still on the board at the Jewish home.
Today, you are still on the board?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. I'm the only resident probably on the board. I'm living at High Point now. I've come full circle because I've been a professional, I've been a volunteer, I've been a family member, had my brother was there, Papa Jack Shaw was considered an ambassador who carried on the tradition of goodwill and helping everybody. Then I'm on the Medical Ethics Committee, Resident Services, Board of Hand in Hand, was Vice President of Programming. And somehow in between there, I was very involved at Bethel in their sisterhood and was Vice President. I was Vice President of Volunteers for the Hand in Hand Auxiliary at the Home, Vice President of Programming at Bethel on their education, library committees, and all special projects together with my husband, though. I can't ever set aside, my husband and I did things together. He was always very supportive, was a volunteer right with me.
What are you most proud of, what you have done?
Oh, yes, and I must tell you there are other things at the Jewish home. I'm trying to think. Oh, I must tell you that I was one of the founders of what we call the Caring Partners, the hospice program, and I worked together with people like my niece who did the educational. We decided that no one should die alone, and this is a program where we work with people terminally ill at the end of life and give them support and want to help them to live out their life the best quality that they can get, to die in dignity, never to die alone, to give support to their family, to the staff, and this is something I still do. And I got the first award, the Bicker Halom Award. And I'm proud that I also, my husband and I received we were on the board of Jewish National Fund and were honored by them. Also that I got the Major Kesselman Award. I sound like I'm bragging because it's only very little compared to what some of the others I've worked with, because I've worked with giants on our board, and that's what I'm the most proud of.
But you've been a very active and important person in
Well,
the Jewish community.
Well, I try because Yiddishkeit is very important to me. I started when I moved to High Point. We moved there in an emergency. Unfortunately, my husband became ill and had to come right from the hospital. Fortunate with Parkinson's and cancer. We had some very difficult years, and losing our son within a half a year, this was a difficult time. But I kept so busy, and that the reward was so great, the years that I worked at the home and the volunteerism, that it was always a labor of love, because what I was receiving was the love and the appreciation, respect of the families and friends. And somehow they all became our extended family. Our friendship grew with meeting new volunteers, now my friends at High Point. And then I recently, within the last, it's almost a year, started a Yiddish club, because Yiddishkeit is so important and I want to perpetuate that. And what I do is I bring in program speakers that are involved in Jewish education, professors from the University of Wisconsin and Madison, professors here from Jewish organizations.
This is at High Point?
At High Point. And recently I was, with my idea, but with the help of, believe me, with everybody's help, and Nancy Weiss McQuid, who is a professional, produced something that we call the Jewish vaudeville, the Jewish musical vaudeville, and I decided that this should be a tribute. We did it to music, song and dance, mind you, and we had so much fun planning it, and it turned out to be quite a success. In fact, I haven't watched the videotape yet, but it was to honor and tell the staff and the administration and the volunteers and the caregivers, the personal ones, at the Jewish Home and Care Center, how important they are to us and how wonderful they are, because they get many complaints. And I'm constantly emphasizing that we are so fortunate to have the most wonderful Jewish Home and Care Center, High Point, the Bader Center. That won some kind of an award, and it's been a model. Our Caring Partners program won a national award and have been followed by others. So I'm proud of all these things, and I'm constantly wanting to improve quality of life. And I love working with people. So whatever I do, I'm an organizer and I love people, and I'm just constantly starting one thing and can't finish it and getting into another. Unfortunately, my health is just not keeping up with my wanting to do things.
Well, you
But I
certainly
love
are
where I'm
going.
at. Well, very slowly now, though. Very slowly and with great difficulty.
Do you have any regrets?
Yes, I guess my only regrets were that I feel handicapped by not being, number one, being able, I love to sing and dance. I've lost my voice, and I love Yiddish music, and I love doing things, and it's getting harder for me to get around. Of course, my saddest times were losing my husband and our son. Our greatest joy was our grandchildren, that's very close to our family, very loving, dear nieces, but everyone is out of town. But the regrets are that, and I probably will never change it, because that's the way I am, is that I didn't take better care of my health. It was my husband's one complaint, that never put myself first. But this is just the way I am. Start one thing, then before I'm even finished with that, can't say no, and I'm into something else. So perhaps I would be more moderate in what I do, but that's not what I'm made of.
How would you like to be remembered?
Oh, I guess as a person who's an organizer, loves people, and was raised to see only the good in people. I guess that's the one complaint everybody would have about me, especially my family, you're always seeing the good in people. Well, I was told, and by example, by my parents, that if you can't say something good about someone, don't say anything. And when I'm hearing people saying negative things about people, I'm not disqualifying the fact that all of us are not perfect, but I always can see the good in people. And somehow my husband always used to say I was a Pied Piper. No matter what I did, I always had my friends following me. So they always volunteered with me. I brought them to special programs. My friends were always, we filled in on holidays when Christmas, where I brought people in to come and serve tea, to visit with people. And then there were so many other things that I've always been involved in. There's never been an end to it. I'm always thinking of right now planning a Hanukkah party. And I also was a founder of our Chavarah Bethel with Joe Hirschberg, and we're still what we call ourselves the senior Chavarah Bethel. We meet at Manchester, and I bring in the programs. I'm still the program chairman. Now I started a dance class. I also at Manchester Village, when we moved there, after living from 11th Street, we moved to 45th and Keefe, where our son was raised, and after the war we lived there. That I also started so many other kinds of, I'm always into organizing things. So then we moved to a townhouse in Manchester, so I started a social committee. I was appointed activities director and really had the joint jumping, so they say. We had something doing day and night. I started like a mini college, all kinds of educational programs. I tapped into the universities, and we had knitting, we had educational courses, we had bridge, dancing classes, trips to theaters, pool parties, style shows, rummage sales. You know, no matter what it was, there was always something happening. Started our dance class there, moved into friends in the basement, in their recreation room, and still continue also organized a group of the professionals I work with called the Has-Beens. Now I think we changed our name to Wannabes. So, and I'm still close with some of the nursing directors, the people, the social workers I work with, my executive secretary, and it's always into something like that.
You are a people person.
Yes, I guess so. I'm not reading my notes, so I think I might as well see you better without these glasses.
Well, is there anything else you would like to talk about that we haven't mentioned or haven't gotten to?
Just tell you that my family, very close to my brothers and sisters, and they're all gone. Sister-in-laws were like sisters, but we always became their caregivers. I was the youngest, which was wonderful, being a basachira, having 3 brothers. My mother finally had 1 daughter, had lost these other children, and spoiled by grandparents. And then suddenly you turn out to be the youngest, and you're left as a caregiver. So I was a caregiver for parents, grandparents, my brothers as they got older, and I shouldn't say we, my husband and I, because he probably did more than I did. For my brother and sister-in-law who were in the home, advocates for them, Papa Jack Shaw, who was just like the Shapiro, a ambassador, they called him there at the home, helping everybody, giving everybody something, watching over them. And I think that there were so many things in my life that I was into that I think everybody's life is busy. But I think my life is always very complicated. It's a complicated life. I think I'm going to be remembered as a very complicated person because I don't do anything simply. Because I'm a researcher, I'm a resource person, people will always call me for information, what to do, where to go, or so. It seems that I always seem to have the answers.
I just want to ask you
Yeah.
a question about your husband.
Yes.
Where did he teach?
In fact, I just recently, I must tell you, I have a booklet here. I just recently had the 1-year memorial. We dedicated the stone. and I don't know if you read about it. Oh, by the way, we're also honored on a Shabbat by Abe Chudnow at the Jewish home, where he honors people who are involved with Jewish community. My husband passed away a year ago, and when we dedicated the stone on the 19th of September, after that I planned a celebration of his life and did a booklet that I brought along here, a story of his life, his career, and going down memory lane with tributes. There were hundreds of beautiful tributes. He taught at Custer High School. He was in the field of education as a counselor, guidance, career counselor for almost 50 years. And he ended up as an assistant principal at Custer High School. But he also was very involved in Jewish education. He taught Hebrew school at Eastside Hebrew. He taught Hebrew at the boys' home at that time. There was a home for boys, for evidently whether they were displaced or for some reason. He was a youth director at Shalom, taught Sunday school at Bethel. He was a waterfront director at Camp Sidney Cone. He was a camp director at JCC. He was constantly involved with, he was honored as Man of the Year at the Bethel Men's Club, was on the committees with me. So, but I did there's a little booklet which I will show you on his life. And we had almost 200 people and a musical tribute, our favorite songs.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Will you give the Milwaukee Jewish Historical Society a copy of the book about
Yes, I
your
will. I'm
husband's
having
life?
a grand short 50 books, and I'm having, yes, because his life was very, very interesting, and he was very special and well loved, as you'll see by the tributes of the people. He was very kind, gentle, compassionate, caring, dedicated, and he went on for his education, was working toward his doctorate also, got several degrees, and was very highly respected. And we both had a very great interest in Israel, very much so, and every Jewish organization.
Have you been to Israel?
Yes. Our first trip was, we went with Rabbi Switchko on the teacher's tour. And so it was one of the highlights of our life. It's in my list here of many things probably. I'm probably saying more than I should, but if I read this to you, maybe it just would have been faster and simpler.
Well, I thank you very much.
And I thank
It
you
was
for...
very interesting. You've had
Thank
a
you.
wonderful life and
Thank
have
you.
made an impact
But it's all,
on the community.
Thank you. But it's all been a labor of love for me. It's all gotten much more than I've ever given from all our wonderful friends, and thank everybody for all the wonderful support and friendship that we got during the difficult times and happy times.
Well, you should be active in this community for many years
Thank
to
you.
come.
Thank you, Doris.
And thank you very much for giving
Thank you.
of
This
your
is a
life
privilege
and time.
for you to have asked me. Thank you. Yeah. Should I show you a booklet? We're all, I put it in here someplace. Maybe it's in here. Or either I put it in or I left it home while the telephone rang at the end. But I think I have one right in here. Just to show you. This was another labor of love for me, was the putting together this. Never mind. No, never mind, Doris. It's okay. I'm known for dropping everything. Everything falls out of my hands. But you know what? Here it is. It fell down here. Just to give you an idea, this is not the corrected version.
Could you hold that up?
And if you want it,
Yeah, maybe she
want
would
it-
like to hold it up.
then
Here.
turn it
You wanna
around.
hold
Yeah,
it up?
here.
Yeah.
And then I can...
This is, and I'll show you the back also.
Okay.
Can you read what's on here?
Yes, yes, I can.
Okay, would you like to see the back?
Please. That's very nice. Thank you.
And I'm just going to show you what it starts with his career and pictures of all of us, and then people with very beautiful tributes to my husband. He was very, very special.
Well, the archives would certainly
Yes,
love to have a copy
absolutely,
of this.
yeah, because he's very special. Probably far more special than I am, I know that.
Well, you were
But
two
we were
very
a
special
good, but we
people.
were a good team. We were a good team. And of course, our greatest joy was our grandchildren, our pleasure.
How
of
many
our grandchildren.
grandchildren do you have?
Two.
How
They're
old
both
are they?
married. Yeah, 26 and 21 or 22. Grandson just got married, and our granddaughter, both happily married, both very wonderful children, and very close to my nieces and nephews. They're very dear. They're like also consider us their grandparents. Very close to many, many friends. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And thank you again.
And here,
I
worked
really
so hard
appreciate
trying to
it.
get this door so nicely organized, and so it would go fast. And here I'm skipping around, and whatever it is, you got the idea. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
Got the
It
idea.
was wonderful talking with you.
But thank you, and you are a wonderful interviewer, and you're a wonderful cameraman. I love your smile.
Thank you.
I wanted to be
Beautiful
able
story.
to take a picture of you. He's got such a very pleasant smile. What's your name again?
My name is Kurt. And
Chris?
it's Kurt.
Kurt.
And it's
What's your last name, Kurt?
Johnson.
Kurt Johnson.
Yes. And
Okay.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much.
What a wonderful part of the community you've been.
Pardon?
You've been a wonderful part of the community.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
amazing.
I know all the wonderful people who Tybee Tagler, and what I wrote down in there that I work with alongside of Giants, one of the greatest things is the wonderful board members, people like Marty Stein. Take people like Barbara Stein, Marty Stein, Jay Joseph and Mike Joseph, Bert Zucker. In fact, I honored those people in my Yiddish Club presentation. I called them the Yichases. People like the Rakitas. I worked with all these wonderful people. To work with Nita Corey, to work with Mina Tepper, Debbie Zemmel, and everyone that I've known for the many years. And I was also a liaison to every agency, worked with Medicare, Medicaid. I did so many things, and what I didn't get to tell you is that I always say that I've gone full circle. I started I was a volunteer, then a professional, then a family member, and then suddenly, right now, a resident. So I've worn all these hats, and that's like what I say is why my hair is so thin. But I enjoyed every minute of it.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
And I think I'm one of the few residents that are still so involved. Plus, I think I'm one of the longest members, longer than Nita, that's been involved with the Jewish home. That
How
I still
interesting.
have contact.
How interesting.
Yeah, I guess we're all done.
I think so.
Thank you, and
Thank
I'm
you
enjoying
very
the
much.
cookie. And thank you both. I haven't had a little